Brokk! Brokk! Brokk!
What? I'm on a fucking break. Don't hear me screeching at you whenever you're twiddling your short and curlies.
Continuing the exploration of God of War and the mythology behind the game, today we'll be taking a look at Brokk and Sindri, the dwarves who made Kratos' axe and help him modify the weapon throughout the game. Now, quite a few people chose to ignore the spoiler warning in the title of the previous video, so this is me formally warning you. This video will contain spoilers. If you do not want to be spoiled, then I urge you to click away now. Many of you will be pleased to know that the two brothers did feature in Norse mythology, where dwarves were known for their work with metals and being able to craft the finest weapons in all of the 9 realms. Brokk was originally known as Brokkir before his name became anglicised, and it meant one who worked with metal, implying that he was a blacksmith. The name of his brother Sindri was believed to have derived from the Old Norse Sindir, meaning spark, and it was also the name of a hall where the virtuous souls would go after Ragnarok. In some versions of Norse and Germanic folklore, Sindri was instead referred to as Eitri, and along with his brother Brokkir, they would craft some of the most iconic pieces of jewellery and weaponry in Norse mythology. In the game, the two brothers are still shown to be dwarves, but with Brokk having quite a distinct appearance as his skin is blue. Now, for those of you wondering if he was referred to as a blue-skinned dwarf in Norse mythology, the answer is most likely no, but I will say it's very likely that dwarves were seen as having a different skin tone to the other beings that featured in Norse mythology. Spending most of their time working underground and in caves at their forges, we can assume that the lack of sunlight would have meant that they had very pale skin. There are some differing depictions in Norse mythology where dark elves and dwarves were considered to be almost the same thing. So if we take that into consideration with the fact that they would have been working around coal and soot and dirt all day, it's definitely not impossible that dwarves could have been depicted in a similar manner to Brokk. We can interpret the reasoning behind the brothers' different appearances in several different ways. It can be seen as the makers of God of War acknowledging that dwarves would have been depicted differently throughout Norse mythology, or perhaps it was just done to further highlight the differences in the two brothers and their personalities. Brokk and Sindri spend most of the game separated after falling out with each other, and we're introduced to them both separately, where we find out the axe was made for Atreus' mother and was passed down to Kratos upon her death. We end up in this comical situation, with the brothers constantly insulting each other's craftsmanship, until they are reunited by Atreus and Kratos. Their role within the game isn't huge, but it's still fairly significant, with them acting as merchants and craftsmen, and they do also provide some comic relief in a game with a fairly serious tone. Brokk for the most part appears as grumpy and angry, mostly just cursing and throwing insults around. His brother Sindri, on the other hand, is a lot more timid in nature, and he makes it apparent very early on that he's somewhat of a germaphobe, heaving at the mere sight of blood on Kratos' axe. Where Brokk appears to craft weapons of war, Sindri offers a much more intricate touch, and in order to help Atreus and Kratos, the two brothers have to come together, where they would eventually create a new family seal to signify their work. For the rest of this video, we'll be covering Brokk and Sindri within Norse mythology itself, where the brothers' greatest involvement was crafting Mjolnir, Thor's hammer. The story begins like so many in Norse mythology, with Loki being in a mischievous mood. It was on this given day that he decided he would cut the long golden hair of Sif, the wife of Thor. Naturally, when Thor learnt of what had happened, he threatened to kill Loki by breaking every bone in his body. After several hours of pleading with Thor, Loki was allowed to go down to Svartalheim, the realm of the dwarves, and ask them if they could fashion a new head of hair for Sif. When Loki would eventually reach Svartalheim, he was able to obtain what he was looking for from the two sons of Ivaldi, who also gave him a ship made from the thinnest wood, and the Gungnir, the deadliest spear of all. Not wanting to leave the dwarven caves just yet, Loki approached the brothers Brokkir and Sindri, taunting them, claiming that they could never forge anything equal to the 3 creations of the sons of Ivaldi. Loki was so confident in his claim that he bet his own head on their lack of ability. Naturally, Brokkir and Sindri were extremely angered by Loki's disrespect and accepted his wager. As the brothers began to work, they noticed some kind of fly or wasp flying around. This was of course Loki in disguise, and when Sindri attempted to squash Loki, he was stung on his hand. The brothers' first creation was a living boar with golden hair, named Golinbursti, which was capable of outrunning any horse. The fly then turned to Brokkir, biting him on his neck, as Sindri pulled from the furnace a second creation, a magnificent ring named Draupnir. Sindri then placed a piece of iron on the hearth and told his brother that for their next creation they would have to be far more meticulous, as any mistake would be far more costly than their previous 2. Loki once again attempted to interfere, stinging Brokkir's eyelid so his vision would be impaired. But Sindri had already finished producing a hammer of quality that had never been seen before. The hammer would never miss its mark, and could boomerang back to its owner after being thrown. The only flaw that this hammer had was that its handle was too short. But despite his unhappiness about the imperfect weapon, Sindri named his creation Mjolnir, meaning lightning. When Loki returned to Asgard, he presented all of the items that he had acquired. To Sif he gave a new head of hair. To Thor he gave the hammer Mjolnir. The ring and spear, Draupnir and Gungnir, went to Odin, and the boat and bow went to Freyr. The gods were extremely grateful for the gifts they had been given by Loki, but they still deemed that he had lost the wager, and his head would be given to Brokk and Sindri. When Brokk and Sindri arrived in Asgard, knives in hand, ready to claim their prize, Loki pointed out that he had only promised his head and not his neck. The two, clearly angered at Loki's trickery, decided that they would be content with sewing Loki's mouth shut before returning to their forge. Brokk and Sindri may not have been mentioned to the extent of the Norse gods, but they were still responsible for creating some of the most iconic objects in Norse mythology. For the most part, the game seems to do a good job in depicting the two brothers, even having Kratos' axe work in a similar way to Thor's hammer. The only real difference between the brothers in God of War and in Norse mythology is that the brothers seem to be quite comical within the game. But if we go by the story we've just heard, we can see that the brothers were definitely not fond of Loki's humour, and they were definitely portrayed in a far more serious tone. I hope you guys enjoyed some context and background surrounding Brokk and Sindri, and if you did, then feel free to share your ideas and thoughts with me in the comments below.